she's doing God, my brain is still in LA mode. Are you going to, there's Newsgeist and there's, what's the other one? No, there's the other festival. Oh my God. Yes. No, the one in Europe.
You should wait.
The Newspaper Festival.
BBC.
Yes, Jen. You're not? Okay. Well, she's hosting that, so.
She does it so well, I'm sure.
So when are you next in LA?
Anytime.
Come over, seriously.
Really, I fell in love with Santa Monica.
So we'll share this one.
We just bought a house.
Oh, right, okay,
Yeah, no, definitely come over.
So I was going to, as an introduction, I want to say who you are, how you got into product, and then could you give one example of a product in the media you think really works?
A product in the media that really works.
Or actually, if it's the Uber app, that's okay. Just so people get a sense of what product means to product people. It's not a newspaper, it's not a program, it's now a differently defined thing. So your own pet product that you think either this is great or I wish we'd done that.
Wow, I need to think
is
about
that.
Yeah. Is there a pen and paper that I can borrow?
There you go.
It might be useful to find out whether people are journalists or product people.
Yeah.
If they think there's somewhere in between.
Great. Good idea. Okay, welcome. Great to see you at our panel, which is on Product 101, Demystifying Product, how it matters and how to get it right. Before we start, can we just do a quick show of hands? How many people here are product people? And how many people are journalists working with product? Sort of in connection. Okay.
How many people in between? Everyone's divided up.
Okay. So this, we wanted to make a really practical panel. So we want to kind of make it as interactive as possible from as early on as possible. So if you've got questions, just really dive in. Complete full disclosure here, and this isn't imposter syndrome. I am not a product person. These three are definitely product people. The reason I suggested to Nick and we decided to put this panel together is I've been researching hard inside the media industry for the last 6-7 years, and one of the proxies that has emerged for me for organizations that are stronger in terms of transformation, in terms of digital performance, the one kind of silent proxy I have is not only how strong their product function is. Most people now have a product person on the board. It's not just that. It's the extent to which the rest of the organization understand what those people are doing and why they matter. And the central thing is not just having a great product function, it seems to me, it's the extent to which that function is really tightly enmeshed with the editor-in-chief, with the CTO, with the chief revenue officer, that people really understand what product's doing, because product has become much more complex. It's really evolved very fast. It's often evolved very fast inside media firms. It's gone from the tech into the marketing area, then into editorial. It's changing quite hard. It's kind of been led. It's a kind of software-based, software engineering thing that's been laid on top of often the legacy engineering. So our goal here is to try and demystify products. So this is your opportunity to ask any questions of editorial, why they don't understand you, of editorial product, what it is you actually do. So to kick off, I'm Lucy Kueng. I'm a senior research fellow at the Royce Institute, like Nick. I'm also a professor of media innovation. But I'd like to get the panel to introduce themselves. I would like them to answer 3 questions. Firstly, who they are, how they got into product, what was the journey that took them there, and thirdly, just to give us a sense of how complex and sort of broad the concept of product has become in the media industry. Name one product in the media that they think's great. It can be something they produced or something they wish they made. But just a sense of what product now looks like in the media. So Anna, over to you first.
Hi. Is this on? Yes. Hello. My name is Anna Jakimovska. I'm a director of product at The Guardian. The first sort of question is how I got into product. So about 10 years ago, I studied informatics and started on a journey of being a developer. I wasn't a particularly good one. I understood technology, but I was thinking, I'm not going to win being an engineer. And from that sort of moment, I went to do a master's in the UK around information systems and technology. So I was always interested in the business side of technology, followed by a PhD in artificial intelligence, which was very data heavy. So I kind of understood the technology side. I had an insight into the business side of things. I was always interested in the creative side of sort of what makes a product usable, whether it be it physical or digital product. And when I was thinking, you know, what is the thing that I enjoy the most out of all of these aspects of specific sort of part of my academic career or professional career up to that point, I realized that product is the discipline that sort of is the focal point of all of these three areas in a way that is not too deep, but equally sort of quite wide-reaching and encompassing various disciplines. So that eureka moment then sort of made me pursue a career in product. And in the past sort of 10 years, I've worked at various media organizations, from which the Consumer Association to Channel 4, looking after most of their products except 4OD. At ITV, I was a product manager for social media and online games. At BBC, I was the lead product person for a product called BBC Store. Then I was head of product at Sky News, looking after everything that they've done. And now I'm at The Guardian. So as you can see, every 2 years I've kind of embarked upon a new challenge, and that sort of gave me wonderful sort of insight into the UK media industry, but equally into different sort of ways in which product is being done at different times.
And a great product in your eyes?
I'm going to be super biased. I like the Guardian app. But I've liked it before I joined The Guardian, so that's my excuse. That's okay. But there's tons of really good products out there. I think the Deutsche Welle app, absolutely. I mean, from sort of the Uber app is super functional.
Uber app is fantastic.
So yeah. There's lots of sort of things that I use with, and I have great satisfaction of sort of my experience with those apps.
Nic.
Hi, thanks for coming out in the rain. So I'm Nic Newman, and I started as a journalist, spent 15 years as a journalist, but I was always interested in technology and how it was reshaping journalism, and so I kind of lobbied within the BBC for an internet site and was part of the launch of that in 1997, so one of the founding team there, and spent 5 years being incredibly frustrated at the technology side of the house as it was then known. So there was nothing called product, there was no product function, there were project managers and program managers coming out of your ears, and everything was so slow, and I felt so frustrated. And eventually there was a sort of big coming together. They got rid of the head of technology, and they said, "You can do it, Nic." So they put me in charge. I had no idea about the culture of engineering or how to make this stuff quicker or better. I said I'd do it for a month, and I stayed for 10 years. So I basically learned about product and felt there had to be a better way of doing it. I came across an amazing guy called Marty Kagan, who's a kind of guru of product management, brought him over to train our product team as we renamed ourselves. And actually many of those people are now running or have run media companies in the UK and elsewhere. So I'm incredibly proud of what we did there. I then spent effectively 9 years running product teams and product disciplines, and I also helped the BBC come up with frameworks for what product management is about and how, and sort of evangelizing around methodologies and process. Why do I think this is important? I think it is critical to the future of media companies. How do you bring together editorial and technology into and design into experiences that customers love? I mean, that's the heart of what we're trying to do, and it's really difficult because you have to translate across all these different disciplines, and there is so much misunderstanding, and the pace of change is so enormous. So I think these skills of how to do it, how to enable media companies to innovate at speed, to make quicker decisions. You know, this is the heart of what we're talking about. We're not fundamentally talking about technology. We're talking about how do you bring this together and how do you shape it. So I'm absolutely, I'm really passionate about that. I think it's so important, but so misunderstood. The product I love, I'm going to choose Netflix just because I think it is brilliant. You know, the way it looks great, it's really fast. It kind of gives you a sense of where products are going more as services. It remembers who you are. It anticipates your needs. It's If you're on a mobile, it is delivering you mobile-first tasters and formats. It's really embraced a lot of that stuff and integrated it in a really clever way. And it also does the product marketing or communication stuff really well. So it's, you know, it's talking to me personally in a way that I feel personally that a lot of media products simply don't do.
Great, thank you. Lippe.
Hi, my name is Lippe Oosterhof. I am head of product for Yahoo News. I'm based in California. So I have a team of product managers that look after products that are related to Yahoo News, so websites and products and some other very clever bits. So how did I get into product management? Actually, my very first job was product management. I just realized that in the mid-90s, I joined a fast-moving consumer goods company as product manager. And I had no idea what that meant, but it sounded pretty impressive. And my role was, I was responsible for a line of baby food, believe it or not. And I immediately fell in love with the job of product manager because you're kind of like a mini CEO. You look after a lot of things, and your job is to make them act in harmony. So I would spend on a typical day, and I'm going to dive into this because I think it's nice to go out of media and then back into it, because there's a lot of parallels between brand management and product management in tech and media. But I would spend a typical day meeting with researchers to learn about our audience. I would think about pricing and do competitive studies and model it out. I would visit a supermarket to see how it would look like on the shelf and work with the sales department. I would meet with advertising agencies and about designs and go to the factories. That was almost like a typical day. So the parallels with product management, as we're discussing it today, are very strong because it's a very multifaceted role, and you need to be a generalist, but at the same time you need to be able to go into great detail. And I'm sure we're going to speak in a bit more depth about the responsibilities of a product manager, but that's kind of my starting point. And then the rest of my career, after that I moved to a bank as a product manager who needed the fast-moving consumer goods skill set that I had built up, and I launched the first portal for small and medium-sized businesses, and that was kind of the start of my career. That was a big visible project. I then started a company, became an entrepreneur, dived in and out of entrepreneurship and working for startups. So I've spent a lot of time in startups. 2 startups I was a CEO of, and as a CEO of a small business, you're effectively a product manager. The product is the most important thing, and your role is to bring the entire company together, all the different disciplines, to make sure that that product is successful. I moved to California in 2015. I started a new business. I was the CEO of that, but effectively spending 90% of my time on product after we did the funding, because I spent 100% of my time on funding, and then 90% of my time on product after that. And then I recently joined Yahoo News about 5-6 months ago as head of product. So that's how I got into product management. So what is my favorite app? That's a very unfair question because there are many for different reasons.
But the one you wouldn't be with, on a desert island, what would you not be without? Assuming you've got...
Right. There's an app that I don't think many people have heard of called Lumosity. And it's an app that helps you. It's basically lots of puzzles, and it helps you to train your brain. And it's a product that is so incredibly polished and so full of love. You can just tell that the designers and the people working on it spend blood, sweat, and tears making it a great user experience. That as a product manager, that's an app that I always point to. Lumosity. L-U-M-O-S-I-T-Y. And
Everyone's writing it down.
yeah, exactly. I'm sure there's a discount code somewhere that I can dig up. Yeah, it's a great app that you can use daily, basically to train a few puzzles. And the reason I love it is, apart from the polish that I mentioned earlier, the product is conversational, so it speaks to you, and it measures how you're performing against yourself, against other people in your age group. And so there's a lot of depth in terms of data and measurement. It personalizes the experience. but it does so in a way that is really friendly and very trustful. So it's a bit outside of the kind of the core apps that we know and outside of media, but I think it's an app that I love.
Great. Okay, I'm going to dive in, ask some questions of the panel to kind of get the discussion going, and then we'd really like to open it up. So I'm going to kick off with you, Anna. And in our prep for this, you described the tensions between espoused and actual attitudes towards product, i.e. that leadership talks the talk about how central product is, but actually, in some ways, in practice, product's kind of a conduit to the tech teams. Can you explain this tension between what they say your role is and what it actually feels like if you're on the ground?
Yes, no, absolutely. So who here doesn't sort of agree with what Lippe said around the role of product? I think when you kind of explain it, it totally makes sense. And it's sort of, you get a lot of nods and lots of right sort of narratives from senior people. And this is across the board in all the organizations that I've worked in. And a lot of the narrative comes from what the Silicon Valley is sort of telling these execs when they go on inspirational trips there. But the reality of things is once you get into sort of on the ground into the organizations that do have some legacy, that are not a startup, that have been around and had different sort of model attached to kind of the digital model and are part of businesses who are going through significant transformation, then, you know, the nods around, yes, that's absolutely important for a product function to exist and to be empowered to make decisions. It does end up being, we need translation as to what the engineers are telling us around the sort of things that from a sort of slightly removed position to the audience understanding we believe are the right things we need to pursue. And that has been the case in sort of, not as much here because, not as much now, but sort of in the past 4 or 5 years has been the case of people and execs going, well, we definitely need product people, but we need you to do X, Y, and Z, and sort of this delivery mindset, and when are we going to get this feature from a marketing point of view? And I think that's changing slightly due to sort of people like Marty Kagan, due to sort of people like Nic, due to sort of frameworks such as OKRs, who are moving from a delivery-based mindset to an outcome-based mindset. And that's great within technology teams because they understand it. But unless all of the organization moves to this sort of, to these processes, it still remains quite a challenge because the marketing department will have a completely different way in which they're looking at whether they're successful or not. Editorial would have different sort of ways of working. So the transformation is to a certain extent there when it comes to the digital teams, but it needs to be reflected into kind of significant restructure probably in the remaining parts of the business, if that makes sense.
Does anyone want to jump in on that? Nic?
Yeah, I think that, just to build on that, I think the misunderstanding is that still, I think in most media companies, is editorial or marketing think that product's job is to do delivery. And I think that's a fundamental misunderstanding. So the product role is a strategic shaping role. And as well as Lippe was saying, you know, you have to be in on the detail as well. So it's a really challenging role, but it's both. And that in itself, that's a problem because there's so many other parts of legacy media companies who think that they are responsible for aspects of strategy, whether it's distribution or editorial strategy. How can you have this other person who says that they're in charge of developing the strategy for the product? And in there, you've got the seeds of this battle for control, which continues. I mean, I wrote about this 10 years ago. I think the battles for control are in some organizations better, but in most, they're as bad as ever. The tensions underneath the surface between product and commercial and editorial are huge. And at its heart, you know, editorial has been used to being in charge in media companies, and that's what's different about doing product management in media. The editor is used to getting their way. In the old print world, technology moved really slowly. You could basically decide every aspect of it. In the digital world, Facebook or WhatsApp are making an algorithm change every 2 minutes. Android are changing their operating system. It is simply not possible for the editor-in-chief to understand that. So you need a different model. You need a model of horizontals. You need a model of bringing together and trust. And in my experience, that trust isn't there and people don't talk about it.
Yeah, I think there's a wide spectrum here of I work for Yahoo, which is, you know, a Silicon Valley company, and our heritage is in technology, right? So it's very interesting. I work in California, and I have lots of engineers in California. The editors all sit in New York. So we're effectively two companies morphed into one. So we live this on a daily basis, but in a way we're quite advanced compared to most other publishers in the sense that we have OKRs throughout the company. If you don't know what OKRs mean, objectives and key results, it's a way to measure progress. Our CEO is a product guy. He has product jam sessions every Friday afternoon. Terrible term, but you know, we live in America. We have hack days. We just had a hack day last week where we brought together engineers and editors in a room, and we said, come up with a hack in 24 hours. And it created a lot of collaboration between those teams. So Yahoo is a little bit more advanced, but we also have Huffington Post, which is part of our family. And Lydia, who runs HuffPost, works very closely with our head of product, and has great respect for the role of product management. So we are, in a way, I think, a little bit further along in terms of centralizing the product management function and making sure that giving it the power that it needs to thrive. But yeah, I've worked for Breaking Views as head of product, and Breaking Views in 2009, 2010, now owned by Reuters, was closely managed by Hugo Dixon, the editor-in-chief, and he would dictate what the product would do, and it was very difficult to make a difference there. So I think most organizations in the room and most organizations that I come across are somewhere in between those two.
Can I just ask you a question? How many people here know what OKRs are? So there's some of the product people and a few others. And how many people know what, say, a product backlog is? So the majority of people don't, and actually the language is part of the problem.
That's true.
So if you go into a newsroom, certainly a traditional newsroom, and you talk about OKRs or you talk about product backlog, people roll their eyes. I mean, if you talk about backlog, editorial people think you're behind. Whereas if you're a product person, it's a good thing. It's like the list of things that allows you to prioritize what you do next. And that is the level. I mean, the language is part of the problem. You know, the Silicon Valley sort of brought in, you know, everyone's going around saying, well, we can solve all these problems with OKRs. And the editorial people just roll their eyes.
Yeah. Moving on to this issue of consumer perspective, which you kind of brought in, one of the pain points I've heard from a lot of people in even digitally advanced companies is that consumer expectations around product are now so high. The Uber app, the Netflix app, that's kind of set a very high bar. Organizations with thousands of engineers producing one product, whereas the media has far more diversity, far fewer engineers. Can you talk a little bit about how actually a media company, actually the whole panel, can bridge consumer expectations with actually much more constrained resources and a culture that maybe doesn't get the absolute centrality of getting that UX right? Do you want to kick off on that one?
Yeah, look, despite the fact that I work for a big company like Yahoo, resources are very constrained in our organization as well. So we're up against some very big news apps that, you know, have a multiple of the resources that we have, 10, 20x. So I'm being asked daily by my CEO and management to do things that would take at least 20 times the amount of people that I need. Right, so the internal expectations are that's one of the problems. Externally, look, I've worked for startups, and the one thing I've learned there is that sometimes you don't need a big team to be successful at something. Sometimes a smaller team, you're more nimble and can move faster. But the more important thing is just focus, right? If you don't have a lot of resource, do a few things and do them well, and try and the things that you do, try and delight the customer, which is this, you know, like a very vague term, but you know it when you see it. And everybody has constraints, resource constraints, right? So I think ultimately it's about being very focused about who you serve and why you serve them. So this goes back to, I think, the role of a product manager is to really set the vision for a product, and that means setting the vision almost for the organization. So it's a very strategic role. And going back to Nic's point about language, well, a good product manager can bridge the languages between engineering and editorial and design and executives by understanding what all of those different stakeholders think about and how they speak and how they think. But ultimately, I think as a product manager, if you don't feel that you're being recognized, you can take ownership in the organization by showing leadership, by really thinking about the long-term view of the product. And that means thinking about who is our audience, what other apps are they using, what other websites are they using, and who do we compete with, how can we outcompete those other competitors. So going back to your question, right, how do you become effective when you have little resources? Well, you just need to be very smart about how you're different and how you can be better. So that requires understanding of your audience, making decisions about where you want to outsmart your competitors, and really focusing in on that. And as long as you are, it sounds very easy, in practice it's extremely complex and hard because you have lots and lots of internal stakeholders and external pressures that you need to take into account. But ultimately, the really good apps know what they stand for, and they focus on the things that they are good at, and they ignore the things that other people are good at or that they can't compete on.
Nic, any sense on that? Competing? Oh, sorry, Anna, sorry.
Yes, I completely agree. I think so. When I was working on Channel 4 News, they were saying, well, of course, you know, we're not kind of delivering all the things that we need to deliver, or we're not sort of focusing on the initiatives we need to do because, you know, we don't have as many engineers as The Guardian. I'm at The Guardian, and the narrative as well, you know, of course we're not going to be at this level of impact because Google has 3 times more the engineers, you know, and so that narrative has followed me throughout my career. You know, there's somebody out there who has all the resource that they need, and, you know, that's why they're achieving great things. Just to kind of build on Lippe's point, it's about prioritization and focus. And it's about doing the things that is your USP throughout sort of your products. It's easier said than done. At The Guardian, the product team is made out of 15 people who are managing 14 products, if you like. So if you do the maths, we have around 3 to 4 engineers per product, you know, which is not a lot. And so the way we need to kind of go about finding the right sort of balance is the right level of comms to the execs, who I guess at The Guardian is probably the most mature product-led organization that I've worked in so far, and sort of getting them to understand that we do need to make some tough choices around what is important and what isn't. And yes, there will be areas in the business that will get upset because their pet project or their sort of hypothesis is not validated, but those are the type of decisions that need to be made for the product teams to be empowered to pursue something that will generate the right sort of outcome. And also be very clear of what the outcomes are. If, you know, at an organizational level, you have very clear vision of what is our hypothesis and what we need to achieve in the next 3 months, then, and everyone understands those, then it's much easier to have the conversation as to where you put your resources, because there's never going to be enough.
I'm just going to pick up on your point about expectations. So consumer expectations, which I think have changed enormously, actually, because the products that people are using day by day, whether that's Facebook or Netflix, are just so good. They know who you are, they're anticipating you, and media products on the whole don't do that. Yeah. They're not really anticipating. In many cases, you don't know who people are, so you can't actually do some of that stuff. And we've been doing some research at the Reuters Institute, which we're going to publish later this year, with young people, and particularly with Gen Z, so that's the 18 to 24s. So they have grown up with those apps. Their expectations are off the scale. And if they go to an app which doesn't load instantly, that isn't so fast, that doesn't follow their expectations, they're off. And so media companies have to be absolutely brilliant at that stuff. You've seen some companies like the FT, doing fantastic work to make their products really fast. This is kind of basic stuff, but it's still really important today. And then on top of that, as Lippe says, you have to think about the delighters, and you have to think about the focus. What is it that you are going to be world-class in? And obviously the content is part of that, but that's not enough anymore. It's also the context, it's the experience. What is that experience, and how can media companies do that better?
I mean, we've raised a few kind of mutually inconsistent points here. So,
of course.
Firstly, product is absolutely central. Second, expectations are going up through the roof for younger generations. thirdly, the product role is kind of badly understood in the media. Fourthly, resources are somewhat tight, and you can get treated like a service. So why would a good product manager want to come into the media? Can the media get the product people it needs? Is this an issue?
So it depends on the brand. I think The Guardian is probably not such an issue, just because it's interesting. It kind of what motivates sort of good product people and good sort of people in general. And we find that a lot of the time it is sort of working for an organization that has a positive impact on the world, or is kind of mission driven, and they believe in that mission. And I think the big part of the sort of product role is they should be sort of missionaries as opposed to mercenaries. You know, you shouldn't sort of hire guns to deliver a project. It should be somebody who has passion for the domain, passion for kind of what the content is, and passion for the product themselves. And so I think that's one of the reasons why sort of product people come to work for media organizations, because they're drawn to basically what the output of these organizations. I'm not going to lie, it is difficult because we compete with Google and Facebook and sort of other more product-led organizations that remunerate better than we do. Equally, we cannot sort of promise that we will work on these shiny new things the whole time. You know, we have legacy things that need to be fixed, and also we have basic things that need to be better, to Nic's point. You know, and in a way, part of my role is to educate the product people to say it's not about the next sort of blockchain type of initiative. It is about making your product really the best that it can be. So as product leaders, part of the sort of our role is to bring in the right people under the right expectations, because, you know, I have conversations with my product people to say I've been here for 6 months and I haven't made an impact. Yes, because it takes a long time to build good product, you know. And so, yes, if the messaging and the mission is right, I think that there's decent people out there who want to engage.
Can I just add, I mean, I agree with all of that. I think the answer is yes, it's very hard for the news industry to keep people. And so at The Guardian and elsewhere, you know, you've lost people to Google, you've lost people to big platforms who are paying more. You've also lost people because the job is incredibly wearing, because you're trying to get things done in an organization that is not geared up to support the processes that you're doing. So it is, to be a product person in a media company is really hard. You have to be an incredibly resilient person, more resilient than Theresa May to deliver this.
It's a high bar.
Yeah, just to add to that, it's hard to get good product people in media, but there's two things that help. Money, which is tough. We pay our product managers quite a bit of money, and you know, as Yahoo you need to, because you're literally surrounded by Facebook and Google. They're sometimes in the same building as we are, so it's tough. But that's, you know, to get talent you need to pay, right? It's important, and it's such a critical role that you need to budget for it. The other thing I think is building an understanding and an appreciation at an executive level, right? So ideally have somebody in the executive suite that is responsible for evangelizing the role of product in the organization. An old boss of mine is, he became the, well, I won't mention his name, he's one of the execs at Sony. He followed me to LA shortly after I moved, and he's trying to implement OKRs. And his boss, who's the chairman of Sony, doesn't believe in them, right? So it's not just like you guys, it's also very big companies like Sony that are still kind of, you know, trying to change this culture. So I think apart from just paying people, which is the one thing that's kind of obvious, building this culture within, at the highest level in the company is extremely important. Once that is in place, all of these other things, like the struggles of the product manager to try and be successful in the organization, over time will become easier. So I think that's essential.
Yeah, I've got a few more questions up here, but actually I'd like to open up to the floor now. I mean, questions from the floor to the panel on the issue of product. Who would like to jump in? There's one over there.
Hello, my name is Florian from der Stadt in Austria. So I think when you talk about product, very often you talk about the packaging of journalism. But when you think of the product actually being the journalism, the content itself, then you have product managers in every newsroom, they are the editors. But, and here's my question, why do you think product management tools like OKRs and product backlog, methods for product discovery or for agile development haven't reached the actual content of journalism?
I think that's a great question. I'll go first. So I've run a few products outside of media, so in startup land, and the difference that between a media product and like, let's say, a software product is that content is part of the experience, right? Content is, like for a journalist, content is the product, right? But for a product manager, content is part of the product. And the overall experience of an end user is not just the content. If you open an app and you spend 10 minutes in that app, you are touched by the tone of voice, about the quality of the content, but also about how you navigate throughout the app or the website, right? Whether something works quickly and swiftly, is nicely designed, right? So it's a combination of experiences, and a product manager will think about the holistic experience more than just the content. So your question was, well, why doesn't the editorial side, why doesn't the newsroom use these techniques? To an extent, the newsroom is a very creative organization. So to produce content, you can't necessarily use OKRs or a very metrics-driven culture. It's a constant source of tension everywhere where I've worked. And sometimes it helps to have metrics in the newsroom, and Chartbeat proved that out. But sometimes you need to do the opposite. And we have this saying in the company, here's the news that you want to know, right? So that speaks to personalization and configuration and data and all that stuff. But here's what you need to know, right? And that's the editorial product. And we're trying to find the balance between those two. And what you don't want to do is end up in this kind of like clickbaity type of culture where everything that you do, if you're supported by ads, is designed to optimize. You also need to find your tone of voice. And that's often not easy to manage through a metrics-driven culture. So it's an interesting one. It's an ongoing battle, and I think that's kind of important, that there is a tension, because you can't solve everything with OKRs. So there, I've said it.
Excellent. I think there's. I think it's really interesting. Sort of 10 years ago, 5 years ago, product did the big relaunches, and they were often quite divorced from technology. I think what you've started to see is product techniques now coming into the newsroom, particularly within audience development teams who are using metrics and agile technologies to do trade-offs, to do A/B tests or multivariate tests on content and formats. So I think this is a really interesting new area, because it's not just about increasing the speed or how you're going to do your recommendation algorithms, which is sort of deeper technology. It's also about trying out a new format and getting some feedbacks on it and making the trade-offs about whether it's better than putting resources into that format. So I think that's really exciting, and we are seeing not necessarily OKRs, but certainly agile techniques and testing coming into the newsroom, and much better use of metrics within those kind of teams. So I think that's a bit of sensible hybridization of product stuff coming into format development.
Yes, I completely agree. I would only add sort of two more things. I think the news commissioning side of things will remain unchanged and should remain unchanged. Newsrooms are hierarchical for reasons that there are good reasons. I guess so the choice of topics and sort of what that organization stands for and what they're going to cover is largely unchanged. What has changed, to Nic's point, is how do you ensure your journalism reaches most of the audiences? So when we go and talk to our journalists, we're saying, we have some insight as to how your article could have been read by 10 times more people, and there isn't a journalist in the world who will say, no, I don't want that, I'll just want to stay within sort of the print-based format that I'm used to and I used to do the whole time. So it's quite difficult from a journalistic point of view when you go, okay, from legacy sort of media, so publishers and broadcasters, you know, TV people knew how to produce great news on TV. Publishers kind of knew how to make beautiful sort of newspaper experiences. And now the content formats has proliferated and the audiences has proliferated from the Snapchat sort of type of format to, you know, the app expectations. And so I guess it's a cycle of learning and understanding how you can purposefully ensure your journalism reaches most of the audiences. That's one part. And the second part is within the audience development teams who have the ability, once the journalism is there, to kind of use techniques which are sort of coming from the product discipline to improve the performance, because they understand, you know, what are the metrics and what are the levers they can kind of move. So those are the only things I would add on top of what's been said.
Great. Another question from the room. One at the front, yes. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lea Korsgaard from Zetland, and I'm editor-in-chief with Zetland from Denmark. And I think we consider ourselves as a media company and a tech company. And I'm curious if, in the best of all worlds, what would happen if media as such began to think about themselves as tech companies? What would that world look like, in your opinion?
Start or
It's a great question, and I don't know. I really don't know. I think and a lot of people say, you know, or used to say, well, you need to become a tech company. I'm not sure that's right. I think, you know, for me, it's about the media, and then using technology, much of which you don't have to build everything in-house. You know, I mean, I think you used to, but I think now there are so many great services that you can build. Why would you build another, you know, AI algorithm if you can access a really good one, as long as the knowledge about why you're configuring it and how you're managing that is in-house? That's where you need that kind of specialism. So I think it is about how you combine those things. I think if you're a tech company that becomes a media company, you're kind of and we're starting to see this, you know, tech companies who are buying media companies, or Jeff Bezos buying the Washington Post. He hasn't actually done that, and he hasn't done it, I think, for a good reason, because he sees the heart of the value in the media, and the difference being in the media. I wouldn't be necessarily comfortable if media was run by tech. I don't know what other people think.
I think it's a really good question, and I would answer it sort of in two ways. One is for now and kind of the future. For now, I would say from conversations with some of the tech companies, there's slight sort of underestimation of the human factor, of the human judgment, and of everything that sort of producing good content and journalism sort of encompasses, and that algorithms cannot replace it. So on where we are currently, that division still exists, and it probably exists for the good reason, with the Washington Post example. Going forward, I think as we continue to kind of have more conversations and more closer lines, sort of understanding of the audiences and agendas, there will be probably I'm hoping there will be a point where the newsroom will be kind of very much data-driven to an extent, but equally will have a very clear editorial judgment that wouldn't be state and church, that would be somehow sort of interrelated. But I can't see how now, because the division is still there, and because the times with everything that the disruption of the platforms have brought are quite sort of turbulent. But I can totally see, you know, with the level of maturity that hopefully will come with cross-pollinating journalists and product and tech people, that there will be some happy middle where editorial and the human judgment alongside sort of the data-driven approach would work together very nicely.
Can I just quickly add to that, because I look at this from a slightly different lens, working for Yahoo, which is a Silicon Valley company. So Mark Andreessen, who's an investor, he said years ago, software is eating the world. And what he meant by that was that every industry is being completely transformed by software. And in fact, every company is partly becoming a software company. So 10, 15 years ago, companies outside of media would have this debate. But now it's kind of like, well, everybody uses technology. And media is the same, right? We use a lot of technology to get to our end goal, which is, you know, delight our customers, ultimately. That's the end goal, right? And yes, the newsroom is using technology to get there, but whether you're a tech company or a media company is almost irrelevant, right? I think it goes back to how do you blend these two cultures, these that have been separated for so long, and make sure that they can act in harmony, right? So I think that's ultimately the key goal.
In terms of blending cultures, can we hit this issue of jargon? Because that seems to be actually where the culture pain point is. I must say in my research, I would think 50% of the companies I'm looking at now have OKRs. Agile is everywhere. Even I would suggest in areas it maybe is a stretch. It's kind of probably not perhaps the right approach.
Many different types of agile.
Yes, but this jargon thing, I mean, I think because journalists to an extent feel they own language, that's yes. what they do. Jargon, I mean, I've heard people get very uptight about the use of the word process. You know, what the hell is that? So how do the experts on the stage, the experts in the room handle this issue? You know, some of this jargon we have to use. How do we solve this issue?
So it's really interesting. A couple of weeks ago, I sat in a room with editors and UX people were saying, the editors, we need to define jobs to be done. And the editors were just going, okay, great. And, you know, it's that disparity of sort of a culture of owning the words and super smart people. They're people who have been around and are good journalists for a reason. And then you have sort of these new product people who have been taught OKRs and jobs to be done, and you know, desirability, feasibility, you know, whatever sort of jargon that they use that has come from the Silicon Valley. And I think it was interesting because my take was, well, you don't understand each other. I think that's the kind of problem. And whilst not disempowering the product team to not use best practice, equally sort of empathy is such an important sort of skill or trait that product person needs to have. So it was basically what ended up being is, you know, my diagnosis was they speak Chinese, you speak French, somebody needs to translate. And it should be the product person that translates, and it should be the product person that would make everybody at ease by sort of assuming best intent, because I believe there is good intent in all these slight tensions, but the cultures are very different, and so that translation is really important, and it's sort of everything needs to be driven by a goal, and not dogmatic sort of views. I've had sort of people, digital people that are dogmatic. It has to be sort of jobs to be done. It has to be because this is what's happening in the Silicon Valley, and I think just understanding a little bit and adjusting to the context is really important.
Jargon, look, jargon is sometimes very helpful, right? It allows you to get to the point really quickly, because trying to explain OKRs takes a lot more time than just saying OKRs, right? I live in an organization where editorial has adopted OKRs, and it just makes life a whole lot easier. So jargon is very helpful, but I completely agree with Anna that in the question of who translates to whom, it's product managers that need to build the bridge, because that's their role. Right? A product manager sits at the heart of kind of bridging the divide between editorial, engineering, and all the other departments in the company. And when I sit down with a designer or with an engineer or with a marketeer or with an editor, I adapt my language, right? I change my language, and sometimes things slip through, but I'm trying to be very mindful of who I'm speaking to. And it's essential, because if you don't do that, there is no, it's not just an understanding, it's also almost respect or the ability to collaborate. And editorial typically is very, very paranoid is not the right word, but very skeptical of product and engineering. And if you start with jargon, then you've almost lost the battle. So understanding what they care about and what they're trying to achieve, and then delivering that in a language that they understand, I think is crucial for a product manager to be successful. And on my team, the more successful product managers are the ones that can make that switch, like constantly, every day, every hour, right, as you move into a different meeting. It becomes really complex when you're in a meeting with people from all these different departments in the same room, right?
So this job profile just gets harder and harder.
It's not easy. It's not easy.
Sorry, can I just chip in with
Yeah.
20 seconds? So I think, how do we solve this problem of the jargon in a way is obscuring the differences, and sometimes we use it to cover for the fact that we haven't delivered something or whatever. But I think the way you get around it are, number one, I think the vision is fantastic. So the thing that brings this together is this common vision, which is normally written in English in a way that can inspire. So that is absolutely critical. Secondly, great metrics, simple metrics that people understand. That's another thing that brings people together. Really simple processes. And then finally, delivery. Delivering stuff quickly builds the trust that means that people feel confident when and they start forgiving them even if they do slip in a bit of jargon.
Right.
Very good.
Any more questions on the floor? Great. One, just the back row of the front block here.
Hi there. So before there was ever such a thing as a product person in any newsroom, you had the interactive teams. So they were journalists who could code, they were journalists who were designers, they worked together and they basically built whatever the newsroom needed, as well as amazing stories, both on deadline. I'm thinking of 9/11. This has been going on for 20 years now. You've had these people in the newsroom for 20 years who have been that bridge, but at the same time, have also been a bit of a service desk. So I see a lot of parallels there and similarities, and I'm wondering from you, where have those people gone? What are they doing now, and what are the opportunities for them to participate in this sort of bridging and healing, or whatever we want to call it?
Sure. It's a great question, and I think it really goes back to some of the stuff I was talking about in terms of format. So I think that group, I actually helped set up the BBC's interactive unit in whenever it was, 1997, 1998. And it was brilliant because it was the team, very small teams of people, multidisciplinary. We used to throw darts at each other. It was a really, really close. Absolutely, you went drinking together. It was a way of bridging the divide, and every day you were delivering something. And I think that where those teams are is they've broadly expanded. Their roles become bigger. They've become visual journalism teams, or format development teams, or audience development teams, or integrated. So the range of disciplines is now bigger. As we said earlier, they're now starting to use more agile techniques. In many cases, they develop and run mini products of their own. So it might be a little charting tool or a visualization set of tools that they're configuring or running. Sometimes they have product managers who sit in with them. Sometimes they're just doing a bit of the product role as part of their other roles, and that's fine.
Great. Well, we're out of time, I'm afraid. I'd like you to join me thanking the panel for that introduction, and thank you all for attending and your questions as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Brilliant. That was fun.
Good.
That was fun.
Good. We would all.
Well done.